Normally, I like to cover the campaign ship first whenever a new update drops in World of Warships Legends, but I suspect most of the community is much more interested in the legendary tier Soviet battleship Kremlin, which is the second marathon ship to debut in Legends. If you want to obtain this Soviet battleship, then you have to complete the marathon over this update and the next two. In order to complete it, you are going to have to buy the Admiralty backing from 2 out of 3 of the campaigns, fully complete all 3 campaigns, and then complete enough side activities that give out ship parts to obtain the 20,000 required to get Kremlin. Most people will probably get it around the April-May time. So until then, if you see it out on the high seas, it's going to be driven by one of the community contributors like me. And I've seen from feedback from members of the community that have watched the CCs play this ship over the past couple of days that the consensus seems to be Kremlin is bad. And I don't know that I fully agree with that, although I wouldn't call the ship great. It's at best middle of the pack in legendary tier. I think ultimately it's a couple years too late. And I've got 2 battles to show you in the Kremlin. This first one on Haven is the best battle that I've played in the ship so far. The second one, which I believe takes place on Estuary, is much more representative of the average experience I had in Kremlin. And the reason I say it's probably a few years too late is because the main problem with this ship is that it really does need to be in close brawling range to be fully effective. If you're forced to play it at longer or medium ranges, the efficacy drops considerably. And the problem with a ship that needs to be close in order to work is all of the things that exist in this game to disincentivize or deter pushing. One thing, of course, is torpedoes, which thankfully won't be that much of a problem in this battle. By the way, we take 2 citadels there from either the Republique or the unspotted Yamato in the distance, not sure what. But always good to keep in mind that Soviet battleships have very accessible citadels that can be smacked when you're broadside. Kremlin is no exception to that rule, although the armor, the belt armor, is kind of got this weird angle to it where I think it can end up bouncing some shells at certain ranges, even if you are mostly broadside, so it is fairly tanky. The upper belt armor is also 150 millimeters, the deck armor is 60. Those are great values. It does have an overmatchable 32 millimeter bow and stern, but on the bow it does have a waterline icebreaker that can bounce Yamato shells. So there is that. But ultimately, it's the survivability that I think is the main problem with this ship, not because of the armor. The armor is fine, you could even say it's really good. It's because of the consumables. This is a Soviet battleship, so it's got the gimmick Soviet DCPs that have a very quick cooldown time, but a limited count. And Kremlin starts with 3 of them base. We have 5 in this battle because we've taken a commander skill to fix that problem. But having 3 with all the HE spam and, the Dutch cruisers, not to mention the torpedo dropping airstrikes from the Soviet, or not the Soviet, the American or the IJN hybrids, all of these things are real disincentives for pushing. Although when it comes to planes, Kremlin does have an aggregate AA defense rating of 99, and I think one of the major good things about it is that it does have pretty good AA that can deal a lot of damage to planes, but still, there's a lot of stuff that will focus you down and quickly deplete your relatively large HP pool if you do push in, which you need to. So, in order to facilitate those pushes, one thing that can help is islands. I think in this battle on Haven and in the second battle, we're going to make decent use of the islands to both protect ourselves from being shot, or focused rather, by the enemy team, and also to mask our approach. It also helps that I always spec into concealment on battleships, and the 2 inspirations I have on my commander build for both of these games are Kondo and then Azerlane Sovetski Rossiya. If you don't have Sovetsky Rossiya, but you agree with my concealment philosophy, you can substitute her for Swirsky. Both she and Swirsky give you the same percentage concealment buff. The main difference is that Sovetsky Rossiya reduces fire damage, which is useful to all battleships and Kremlin in particular, especially in light of the limited DCPs. Anyway, the concealment will allow you to get closer to the action without being spotted and focused on the way in, and conversely, allow you to disengage easier. It's also better or more easy to pinpoint the location of enemy destroyers and therefore torpedo threats when you're spotted at 12.4 kilometers versus 13.7 or 14, whatever it would be if you didn't spec into the concealment. There's a lot fewer places on the map that the destroyer could be if you're spotted at 12.4 versus 13 or 14. So, but we've already gone into extreme detail about why concealment is valuable on a battleship. I don't really need to rehash that here. Anyway, as you can see from those citadels we took earlier, we're on low HP, but we get a lucky break because Yamato, for whatever reason, decides to go behind that island. I think if he had stayed there, we don't have an icebreaker that fully encases the stern, and he can overmatch it, so we'd probably be going back to port. But since he left the Johann de Witt all alone, broadside to us, and we were able to take out that cruiser for our first kill of the game, we're about 15 seconds from having DCP off cooldown. We're going to need to use it since we're on fire twice and we've only got one repair party left. Well, we can sort of reset the situation and turn around, hopefully push back in a little bit more, and continue trying to help our team turn the tide, which you might think it looks like this is going to end up being a blowout, considering the red team has 5 ships left and we have 8. But don't worry, the tide is going to turn in favor of the Reds very quickly here. Chad Radar Minotaur in front of us reveals the Vallejo and shows us, with his broadside, that the Kremlin can be pretty effective at these close brawly ranges with the Soviet dispersion it has. But I think in a moment you'll see a salvo against the Rhode Island that will also demonstrate to you why this thing needs to be at close range in order to be effective. Now, though, with 13,000 HP, if we get focused by, let's say, the Vallejo, the Rhode Island out there, the Yamato, probably we're not going to be floating for too much longer. And it just so happens that Vallejo, after getting smacked by our main battery guns, is going to come around that corner for round 2 as we take a shot at Rhode Island. A little bit unfortunate considering what I said earlier about the questionable accuracy at long range. Yeah, there we go. 2 shells, one of which is an overpen. Not great damage on the Rhode Island, but Vallejo, apparently greedy, decides to slow down in front of our Minotaur's torpedoes. So by the time our guns are reloaded, he's gone and we're able to go dark. Rhode Island, meanwhile, is not paying any attention to us, but is broadside. We're a little bit closer, but not close enough, I don't think, for the Soviet dispersion gimmick to activate. However, even at long to medium ranges like this, sometimes the Kremlin's guns can cooperate. Helps if you've got a squishy battleship like Rhode Island to shoot at and they're broadside to you. But, you know, there's a citadel, couple of pens, 20-something thousand damage. And Yamato, who, you know, inexplicably abandoned that Johann de Witt, decides in a grand maneuver to come around the island broadside to us. He shoots at the minnow, which is interesting. Usually they wouldn't do that, but he takes out the minnow, and, well, Yamato's not a brawler, but Kremlin is. 3 citadels into the cheek, not quite enough to take him out, so the dead Minotaur gets the "it's just a flesh wound" medal, and we get a fist. How lovely. Now it's down to a 4v3 in favor of the Reds, but, well, there's Preußen way out there on the other side of the map, and then the other enemy destroyer way out there. Meanwhile, our destroyer teammate is very close to being able to get into the enemy base, so we want to do what we can to support him. And that's going to mean fighting the Rhode Island, who thankfully gets spotted in a place where he can't see us behind the island, and he's broadside to our position. He does radar our DD, which is not great, but we take him out, and we save the life of our friendly destroyer who thanks us. You're welcome, Gearing. GG. Now, the Gearing and I will be able to get into the enemy cap, The Preußen and the enemy destroyer are too far away to turn around and take the cap. In fact, the enemy destroyer gets into our cap. But it's too little too late. We'll be able to secure the victory for the blue team by capping out. And this represents the Kremlin, I think, in its best light. I think the main things to keep in mind are islands are your friend when it comes to pushing in, and building into concealment also helps. The second battle will also demonstrate that point. But this one does end in a glorious victory with the 214,000 damage done. GG to the gearing, of course. And then the 2 kills, the 2 fists, the 10 citadels, the high caliber medal, and the medal that hopefully the Kremlin will be getting when things go well all the time, the Dreadnought. It is a pretty tanky ship in spite of what I have said about it. We're top of the leaderboard with 2,800 base XP, and we can move on to the second battle on the Estuary map, which again is more representative of my average experience. But like the first battle, you'll see us make use of the island cover in order to conceal and protect ourselves as we push up the alpha flank on Estuary. We just won't be running into any battleships. It'll be cruisers and destroyers that are the main things we're going to see. And we're not going to end up dealing a lot of damage, but the damage we do deal will be effective. I think it's going to top around 80k, and that 80,000 number, a lot of times that's what I've been getting in matches where you just couldn't push in for one reason or another and you had to stay at longer ranges. That is certainly not where the Kremlin shines. Anyway, as we line up our first salvo on the broadside Worcester out here, we'll observe the results of said salvo. Our battleship teammate gets the majority of the damage there, but we do get the first blood, which is kind of nice. But I think at this point, because this battle is a lot like the first one tactically, and I think we've already done enough to elucidate the tactics that we're trying to employ, we'll take a look at the commander build. I am using Kosaka Wakamo, who is of course a paid commander, and I realize not everybody necessarily has her, but the reasons I'm using her are the same reasons I would use Kedrov if I did not have her. Now, I'm going to have to test this ship more extensively with Kedrov at the helm, which will have to be a later video, but the main reasons I opted for Wakamo, or would opt for Kedrov, are number one, the skill that gives you more DCPs. I believe Galler also has skills like that, but Galler does not have Master Mechanic. Both Wakamo and Kedrov do. And we only have Wakamo at rank 14 Legendary 2, so she only gives us 1 extra repair party. So we've got 3 instead of 2, but 3 is definitely better than 2. 4 is better than both of those numbers, and if you have a fully maxed Master Mechanic skill on Kedrov or Wakamo, then of course you can get 4. And I think you need the extra heals, I think you need the extra DCPs, which is why I recommend one of those 2 commanders over Galler. Now, the good thing about Wakamo is she's got Flammable Cannoneer, which helps with the accuracy. Kedrov does not. However, if you take Kedrov because you don't have Wakamo in order to get the extra repair parties and the extra DCPs, you could always address the lack of accuracy in the commander build in the inspiration slots. You wouldn't be able to do my concealment thing, and frankly, if I were using Kedrov, I would not be using either one of those inspirations for accuracy. I'd still be using Kondo and either Swirsky or Rosia as the second inspiration because I think it's that valuable. And ultimately, I don't think the dispersion or sigma buffing commander inspirations really matter when the whole goal is to get into close range and you've got the Soviet dispersion to fall back on. Anyway, with all that said, the specs on Kremlin are as follows. We do have a lot of HP, 102,500, so that's pretty good. We've already talked about the armor, which is good, although, you do need to be careful if you are broadside because things can sometimes hit your citadel and deal a lot. The torpedo damage reduction, I think I already mentioned that. 28%, absolutely abysmal. It really needs to be buffed, in my opinion. I don't know why it's this low. on the PC, and I realize PC and Legends are two different games, but everything we have here, Kremlin included, is downstream of PC. And on that game, it has over 40% torpedo damage reduction, which frankly, I think it should have that here. As for the guns, well, as I'm sure you know, they are 9 457mm or 18-inch guns, so of course they can overmatch 30mm of armor plating, but not 32. They have a range of 18.8 km with the flammable cannoneer skill, which would be another downside if you don't have Wakamo and had to go with Kedrov. You really wouldn't be able to spec into the range. But again, you know, it's a ship that you need to push in and get into close range with, so I don't think it's going to be effective at longer ranges, even if you do buff the range. There's that to consider, I suppose. As for the reload time, we are running the reload mod, so we've got 29.7 seconds, and we've got a very snappy 25.4 second 180-degree turn time. Very fast turrets. Something in the Wakamo build certainly helps with that. Kedrov also would. That's his main gimmick, or his base trait anyway. It buffs the turret traverse. Good for brawlers when you need to be at close range and get your turrets on target quickly. The Sigma value is 1.89, although I think Flammable Cannoneer is buffing that from 1.8, which, you know, it's not a very inspiring number. The dispersion at maximum range, well, the horizontal dispersion has like 238 meters, which is pretty wide. The vertical is 179 at max range, but at close ranges, those should be in like the double digits, the 50 to 70 meter range, meaning they should be much tighter and more accurate. And that's what you would expect from a Soviet battleship. You've already sort of seen the difference between the accuracy at close versus long range. I think it's pretty obvious. As for the shell parameters themselves, the AP single shell alpha is 14,500, about what you would expect for these size guns. The HE, though, which we've switched to here, especially for the Jutland, actually has great parameters. 6,500 single shell alpha, pretty devastating to destroyers, as you can see there. I think we even perma-break one of the Jutland's guns, which, you know, that's not great for him. Yeah, we did. He's only shooting 4. How sad. We also have a 45% fire chance on the HE, so if you ever are facing something bow in where you've got to melt them down, Kremlin can probably do that pretty well. Also, if you're a destroyer and you're a British one that can single launch the torps, well, there you go. That's a lot of damage from those torpedoes. I think the only thing that really saves us there is the fact that all the torpedoes hit in the same spot, so damage saturation. Otherwise, we'd be in worse shape. But yeah, you certainly don't want to be taking torpedoes in the Kremlin. You also want to take care, if you're a destroyer, to remember that smoke screens don't make you invincible. And when you're about 3 kilometers away from a ship and shooting your guns, well, it's not that hard to blind fire you in the smoke screen and take you down. That's our 3rd kill of this game. Secondaries are not worth mentioning. Kremlin does have them, but they only have a range of 5 kilometers base. And if you take a close look at the hull of my ship in both of those battles, I think my secondaries get broken in literally every battle I've played in this ship. So yeah, don't spec into them. The AA, on the other hand, it's got an aggregate AA rating of 99. And I think all of the average DPS, the worst average DPS is on the long range AA, 147. The best is at close, 297. I think the AA might actually be capable of shooting down planes, which is good, but even if you can shoot down planes, you can't totally stop them from dropping you, so you still got to worry about airdropped ordnance, even with good AA. The maneuverability, I think much hullabaloo has been made out of that. It's not great. It's got a 29.5 top speed, 29.5 knots, that is, a 1,090 meter turning circle, and a decent rudder shift of 16.3, but this is no more unmaneuverable than some of the other battleships at Legendary tier, and I think you've seen throughout these 2 battles that it can be maneuvered fairly easily. You just kind of have to get a feel for it when it's this unwieldy. The concealment we've already talked about, so that's the end of that battle. We do some good XP on there. We don't do a lot of damage, but we do efficient damage. And like I said, that's pretty representative of my average experience in Kremlin, although I don't know that all of them have been victories like that. Some of my worst experiences have been, damage numbers similar to that, but having to play at long range where we couldn't get too much done. So I wouldn't recommend pursuing the Kremlin marathon and trying to complete it because the ship is a fantastic thing that you absolutely must have in your port. I think the marathon is skippable, and I would just recommend playing the game as you normally would. If you unlock the Kremlin, great. If not, it's certainly not the best battleship at Legendary tier, and I don't really think you need to feel too much FOMO on this one. Just my opinion, of course. You can let me know what you think in the comments. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.